So I'm Caro Wilson, and I am a founder member of the Mill Road History Society, which is helping to run this conference today. And I don't know whether all of you are aware that the Mill Road History Society is now in its 10th year. We started in 2013 when we received a grant from the Heritage Lottery Fund to tell the history of Mill Road, very much wanting to concentrate on it as part of the town rather than the university. It's actually the part of the city where both the town and the university put the kind of things they didn't want to have to think about, like the workhouse and the hospital for infectious diseases. Let's just put them up Mill Road. And of course the railway is one of them. So when we got the grant, we undertook that in the 2 years funding time we had, we would work with the community and produce 10 building reports. If you look on the table over there at tea time, you'll see we've by now produced well over 25 building reports. We also said we would work as much as possible with community groups. So I worked with the group who at that time were resident in the railway cottages. They called themselves Railway House, and they were a community for vulnerable 16 to 19-year-olds, and it was a staffed facility. So in everything I say today, I would like to acknowledge their help, and I also would like to acknowledge the help of Ian Bent, who edited all of our early building reports, and he was brilliant. I see it's advertised, oh, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry, you're doing it. I see it's advertised as talking about railway cottages and Morecambe House, but I'm not sure I'm going to have time to do Morecambe House. I'm going to look at Simon and he'll tell me whether I do. Is that all right with you? Yeah. So have any of you noticed these buildings as you go up Mill Road Bridge? Well, I'm delighted. Not everybody notices them because they are, of course, obscured by the 1982 bridge. They were first of all obscured by the 1886 bridge, and since that time the interiors have really suffered very badly from lack of light. Yes, please, Sam. So we don't know precisely what date they were built, but it's likely that it was very soon after the Great Eastern Railway came to Mill Road in 1845. And at that date there is no sign of the station master's house, but you can just see the line where the railway crossing is, where the level crossing is. Right, next slide, please, dear Simon. These are marvellous photographs, and unfortunately we don't know either their date or their provenance. They were something that just came my way through Becky Proctor. But they do give you an idea, don't they, of how very handsome the buildings were and the scale they were. When you think that you would have been able to see them both from the Romsey end and the Petersfield end because the bridge wasn't there, they would have been very striking. So presumably the Great Eastern Railway was making a statement. We're now in Cambridge and we're here to stay. Thanks, Simon. This is the 1886 map, which shows how very handsome they were at the front. Look at those elaborate little gardens with little box hedges. And you can see that each cottage, which is actually 2 dwellings, has their own path to their front door, and they've got very spacious backyards with outdoor buildings as well. Thank you. So what we know about them is that each of the cottages was accommodation for 2 families. You shared the entrance path, you shared the front door, you shared the staircase, and then you had 2 up and 2 down at the back. And your privy was at the back, and I'm afraid, as you can see, the Chief Medical Officer says, I again inspected the Great Eastern premises and found the cause of the nuisance complained of to arise from the outlet of sewage from the railway cottages and the station master's house. He was reporting on a property in Great Eastern Street, so the sewage had obviously run quite a long way to reach Great Eastern Street. We don't know whether the accommodation was perceived as being more desirable than anywhere else in Mill Road. I suspect it was, because some families stayed there for over 30 years. But we don't know whether you applied to go to be able to rent them, or whether indeed they were allocated to you. We don't know whether the rents of railway cottages were comparable in any way to the rents anywhere else in Mill Road. So there's a lot still to find out. I was very pleased, sorry Simon, not just yet, to find that photograph of George Barrell, who was a ticket collector, and he lived in 29 railway cottages with his wife Anne and 3 children. Right. So what do we know about the people who lived there? Well, until after the Second World War, they were all employed by the railway in various capacities. In the 1851 census, which is the first relevant one to us, 3 heads of houses came from Cambridgeshire, but 9 came from further afield. So maybe they were agricultural workers who'd come into Cambridge in order to find the work from the railway. I wonder whether Thomas Unsworth, who was described as a labourer from Liverpool, perhaps he was a travelling navvy who followed the railways around as they developed. We don't know. I was very lucky to get a lot of information from a retired signalman called Victor Challis, whose distant family lived in railway cottages, and he made the point that everybody in the cottages were waged rather than salaries. And he said that the railway was about the most hierarchical profession that there was, and people would have been very aware of that distinction. Thanks, Simon. So that slide really speaks for itself, doesn't it? There was a full range of employment represented within the cottages, but perhaps it's worth thinking about the fact that they are almost all blue-collar jobs and not the white-collar jobs. I remember Alan Brigham once saying to me that once you got promoted in the railway, your ambition was to have a house in Mill Road with a bay window, and that really did show that you'd arrived. Thank you. What I'm going to do now is just tell you a little bit about 3 sets of families, just to give you a snapshot. The most frequently mentioned trade was a plate layer, and that must have been extremely hard work. Victor said to me that was track work, knocking things in that had to be knocked in. Very hard work. Now, the Lindsay family and the Ince family shared the accommodation in 132 railway cottages. Remember I said there's one on each side of the staircase. And they both lived there for more than 30 years. What we don't know is whether they were being labourers for the whole of those 30 years, or whether at some point they were able to take a pension but carry on living in the cottages. I was very pleased to see the photograph of Walter Ince, who was John's grandson, who didn't live in the cottages, but he still worked on the railway. Again, like so many professions, working on the railway went in families. If your father worked in the railway, chances are you would too. As, thank you Simon, the next slide shows. So Walter Mansfield and his family, he was a carpenter, and he worked with his son, who was described as a carpenter's labourer. And we know his son went on carrying on working with the railway, but not living in railway cottages. You can see that the railway gave you a job for life, and also that there was a possibility of promotion. So Walter started as a carpenter, then he became an inspector on the line, then he was a mechanical foreman, and then he was a senior mechanical foreman. And one of the reasons I wanted to put that slide in, because I'm very fond of those buildings which you can just see from over the bridge, which are part of a very large complex which used to be called the Works. And that's where all the paint shops were, where the blacksmith was, where all the carpenters were. And you accessed that by crossing Mill Road and going under the arch, under the railway bridge. So that's where Walter and his son would have worked. Again, I like that picture because you see the grandeur of the gables on the railway cottages and the size of their chimney. Thanks, Simon. And I've included Mrs. Daldry because she is a female head of household, but also has a job on the railway. goodness, some of us might wish there still were ladies' waiting rooms, weren't they? With a manageress of the ladies' waiting room, which is what she was for some time. But I was thinking about her, Helen, when you were talking, because she ended her days as a dressmaker. She lived next to Mrs. Pomfret. Whoops. Is that okay? Doesn't feel so. She was also a widow, and she was allowed to stay in the cottages after her husband died. So presumably they were living on their husband's pensions, and presumably there wasn't so much competition to live in railway cottages that people tried to make the widows move out. We don't know. So everybody I have told you about so far were model citizens as far as we know, until unfortunately we come to 1917. Now, John Ruffles, he was a plate layer, and he lived in the part of the cottages closest to the railway. And in May 1917, he was spotted by P.C. Squires and P.C. Brooks outside one Ian Sheed's house in Covent Garden. And the policeman followed him to Mawson Road, where he was searched, and he was found to have 5 pairs of ladies' stockings in his pocket, for which he could give no sensible explanation. I thought you'd like John Ruffles. Both his and Sheed's house were searched, and as you can see above, they found 89 pounds of cheese, 4 gallons of gin, and 42 pairs of women's stockings. Believe it or not, John Ruffles said that he found the gin in some straw in the railway hidings near Cherry Hinton, and Ian Sheed said that he found a bag of cheese and stockings as he came home from his allotment. And they were both sentenced to 6 months hard labour. The next thing that perhaps I wanted to highlight is probably the people from railway cottages did take part in the 2 railway strikes, one in 2019 and one 1926, one in 1919. And I was very struck both by the 2 photographs, but also by that, I think, very biased press report. An engine off the road at Mill Road Bridge drew hundreds of strikers to the spot, and while they were smiling and chaffing, a fatal accident occurred at Bishop Stortford, owing to the collision of 2 trains, passengers and goods from Cambridge. Now, one of the things we know about those strikes is, of course, the Cambridge undergraduates were very, very ready to come and work on the trains. So it would have been undergraduates who caused that train to be derailed, and it would have been undergraduates driving the train who caused the collision of the 2 trains. And isn't it mean the way they kind of imply that the guys on the bridge should have been aware of a fatal accident 30 miles away? It wasn't right that they should have laughed and chaffed. So nothing new to report until, Simon, the Second World War. And on about 4 o'clock on January the 30th in 1940, a German Dornier plane was spotted flying very low over the railway station, and it dropped 5 stick bombs right onto Mill Road Bridge. Presumably they were aimed either at the station or at the track itself, and the idea would have been to disrupt the supply trains going to the eastern airfields. The siren went off, and Mrs. Simpkins and her 3-year-old Roger rushed to hide under the stairs, which was the recognised advice if you heard the sirens. Later they had to be dug out by the ARP. Mrs. Simons had a cut on her forehead, but no other injuries. But there was one fatality, John Lake, who was a crane driver, who was cycling over the bridge at the time. The photograph is really very interesting, partly because it doesn't say where this happened. And that apparently was good practice during the Second World War. You didn't want to frighten the public, so you didn't ever say where a bomb had fallen. But it would have been dark at 4 o'clock on a January evening, so obviously the press came round the following morning, and that's such a staged photograph, isn't it? I mean, look at these ARP men, they're all smiling and happy, which they wouldn't have been if they'd just been dealing with a fatality on the bridge. And can you see the lady there? Thank you very much, Simon. That's either Mrs. Curtis or Mrs. Chalice in number 128. And surely she's been posed, hasn't she? I wouldn't think you would be whopping your windowsill just after a large bomb had fallen. We were very lucky in Mill Road History Society because we managed to trace Roger Simpkins and his brother Robin, so we had first-hand information about all of this. But if you do want to find out more, there's a whole section on the website, isn't there, Simon, about the bombing in Mill Road. Just look that up. We've got a lot of good oral interviews. So the railway did repair the buildings, and as far as we know, they continue to let them out to railway employees until in 1966, the building was bought by the City Council. And believe it or not, the City Council had really ambitious plans. What they were going to do was to build a large ring road from Mill Road to the Newmarket Road. It would all have been dual carriageway. So they bought up the whole of the land, including the site that Helen was talking about, to facilitate that. Luckily for us who live in Mill Road, it never came to anything. The property was used as emergency housing. We had a correspondent who told us about rats in the privies. And then in 1984, they hit the headlines again with this wonderful picture. The title is City's Sin Bucket. An incredibly biased material again, isn't it? Mill Road's divided. I met a lot of people who said they were brilliant parties in railway cottages. We had a great time there, despite the fact that I gather the squatters had used the staircases as fuel. So you had to climb up over the roof to get from one cottage to another. But that apparently was very popular. It's also, I think, very impressive that some of the squatters led a very good campaign to say to the Cambridge Housing Society, well, we are young and vulnerable and homeless, so why don't you let us stay and you can help us restore the whole of the property. They were supported by some of the local councillors too, but no matter, they were evicted all the same. The young people I was working at in railway cottages very much identified with these three people, as you can imagine, and they tried very hard to source them by going on sites like Facebook and Friends Reunited, but they never found any of them. And indeed, we wonder if they were all made-up names. They might have been, they might have been, mightn't they? And now, it's all rather sad, because as part of the Devonshire Road complex, it's now owned by Railpen, and the property has been empty for 3 years. Sadly, that was because the Cambridge Housing Society decided that the standard of accommodation didn't meet modern-day care requirements, and they also thought that the residents would be better placed in 4-bedroom houses across the city. I think they were wrong, because I think the staff in Railway House did a brilliant job with them, and I think it must be quite lonely living without any staff in a little bedroom house somewhere in Cambridge. Still, one of the members of the Mill Road History Society wrote to Railpen about this, and we had this answer. Railpen care about the history of these cottages, and we value respectful restoration which is sympathetic to their heritage. We are unable to share a date for beginning restoration, as plans are still underway. Very careful bit of drafting there, isn't it, really? So fingers crossed they keep their word. I'm told that they're now put in plans to turn them into temporary offices while the Devonshire Road development is still underway. And they're saying that would at least mean that they were used during the day. Let's hope so. Have I got time to do Morecambe House? Yeah? Okay, well, if you imagine that railway cottages are just on that side of the slide, thank you, Simon, just to the left of them was this building called Morecambe House. And in the 1886 map, here you see it in all its glory, with its own orchard and with its own path leading down to the railway. But history is a bit obscure. The name is mentioned in various senses as a girls' school at one point, but I'm fairly sure that must have referred to a building that was demolished and that this very handsome-looking building was built specifically for the station master. Thanks, Simon. You can see it here next to the railway cottages, but actually much higher than them. It was a 3-storey house with bay windows. Remember what Alan Brigham said about bay windows are a sign that you've arrived. We know that it had 11 rooms. Again, Victor Chalice told me that it was the station master's right to ask some of the more humble people from railway cottages, i.e. railway porters, to go and chop logs for him. He was station master, he could do what he wanted with his own staff, apparently. So this is a funeral procession going down past railway cottages and past Morecambe House. Next one, please. Now this is a hugely favourite photograph of mine. This is the Boys' Brigade walking past Morecambe House. And can you see the lady in the white scarf and the white hat? Yes? Just above her head, can you see a sort of lump of stone? Well, take a look at the bottom photograph. It's still there. And that is part of the parapet of the 1886 bridge. And I have to say, I give it a little pat every time I walk past it. So next time you walk up the bridge on that side, please look out for that little bit. Thanks, Simon. I couldn't find a photograph of any of the station masters who actually lived in railway cottages, but that's where I got the photograph of Mr. Barrell from. Can you see him on the left to Mr. Kim? And here's a list of the station masters there. Still quite a lot of research to do about that. Thanks, Simon. Now, one of the mysteries is nobody quite knows what happened to Morecambe House. Indeed, Victor Chalice said to me, well, I can't imagine. I know it was there when I came out of the army, but I never saw it go. I never saw it go. One possibility is that it was damaged in the bombing. Clearly not as dramatically as the railway cottages, but perhaps it wasn't such a well-built structure. Perhaps it wasn't in good shape. We know that one person had an association with the railway who lived there. In 62 and 64, it's listed as unoccupied. And in 1982, when the whole land came up for sale, it was described as a parcel of land which is at present covered with scrub. It's extraordinary that, you know, such a significant building could kind of disappear without trace, isn't it? And then my last slide, please, Simon. It's now still Cambridge housing. It's flats, which you can just about see as you climb over the bridge. So thank you very much. That's me. And it's very
questions, yes, questions. Thank you very much indeed, Caro. Questions, anybody? It's a fascinating little corner of Cambridge history, isn't it? And obviously, as you say, there's more to find.
A lot more to find. A lot more to find.
Anyone volunteering out there? Any questions? Yes.
Were there any other railway workers' houses anywhere along the line? It seems a bit strange that only those were built.
We don't know that there are any more that were probably built by the railway company itself. I think, as Helen was kind of saying, it was more the fact that, especially in Romsey, there was such a lot of development that was rented property. And that's probably where a lot of railway workers lived. We know, for instance, that Walter Mansfield's son moved out and lived in Meacham Terrace, and who did I meet this morning? Philip, who lived there as a child. that was again demolished when the 1982 bridge was built. And a lot of railway workers lived in Great Eastern Street, which of course was called Great Eastern Street because of the railway.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Is Mr. Roger Simpkins still around? Because he was my neighbour, I remember, but he's moved out.
Oh, really, Adam? How lovely. Yes, he is. He and his wife, who used to work in Cutlax, live in Catherine Street, I think. Or is that where you live now? Or is he still...
No, Catherine Street.
Yeah? And Robin, his brother, lives in Birdwood Street. And one of the things we were able to do with the community in Railway Cottages was we applied for a grant to remember Second World War, I think it was. The grant came for the Heritage Lottery grant, and we came up with a project whereby some of the residents recreated a victory garden in one of the plots at the back, and we had a tea party. And the Simpkinses came back, and the mayor said hello to them, and the chaplain came, and the Lindy Hoppers danced. And it was great. It was a really nice occasion, and a good thing that the Milward History Society was able to do, I think.
Yeah, super. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes?
So do you think then that Reaching Terrace was built by the railway?
Well, I don't think so, no. I think that would have been private development. It wasn't the same style at all, was it?
No.
I mean, railway cottages are a very surprising style, aren't they? With that sort of Gothic, heavy roof and heavy chimneys. It's a sort of style that was popular in Victorian times. But I think Reaching Terrace looks quite different from that one and only photograph that I've got.